As a kid, I used to read quite a lot, but I stopped doing that as I got older. I thought that I wanted to get back into it, so I started doing so using a strength tracker to keep myself motivated. And since I recently hit 1,500 days, or just over 4 years, I thought it was time to start sharing my opinions on the things that I'd read and not just reading them. In particular, I don't just love reading things, but I love seeing how the same story is told across different media. I like seeing different people's take on them. I like seeing, the differences between the way a story is told in prose versus by audio versus on film. So a lot of my opinions on these books are also informed by the ways that they've been adapted. My top 10 list is not at all objective. It's purely based on my own opinions and vibes. But all of that being said, number 10, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. It's got a quite simple and understated premise, but I think it really delivers. It follows four people who have come to a house looking for scientific evidence of supernatural events. One paranormal researcher, two people who have experienced supernatural events in the past, and the heir to the house. Our lead, Eleanor, is nervous and awkward, and the way that she interacts with the people around her and with the house kind of informs the way that this story is told. There's supernatural events that she experiences that might be ghosts, might be the house itself, might be her imagination, or as other characters start to speculate later in the story, caused by Eleanor herself. Have put this on my top 10 list, but right at the bottom because I don't really have much to say about it. I think it was really good. I think it's really worth reading if you're interested in horror, but I don't have too many deep thoughts about it. And although I know it was adapted to Netflix, I haven't actually seen the TV series based on it. I do know that it's relatively loose adaptation. Instead of the four characters of the book, it's five adult siblings and flashing back to their childhoods in the house compared to their coming back to the house as adults. But apparently, it was very good. I'm aware that it was highly critically acclaimed and I think won quite a few awards. So it's definitely on my list to watch, but I haven't got to it yet. Number 9, Devolution, a first hand account of the Rainier Sasquatch Massacre by Max Brooks. Now, first of all, my apologies because no matter how many times I've rehearsed that, I can't seem to pronounce Rainier correctly, so I am very sorry if I've butchered that. Now, I almost didn't include Devolution on my list. I really loved it when I first read it, but it left very little impression on me afterwards. Uh, so I did think maybe I should go with something which maybe was a little bit more thinky that stuck with me more. But I decided to go with my instincts on this. Devolution is about people living in a high tech commune that get attacked by Sasquatches. The fact that it was published in June of 2020 means that it's really unlikely that it was actually inspired by COVID 19, but it's hard not to notice some of the similarities. Consider the quote: "You can't blame the people in Greenloop for having their cupboards bare. The whole country rests on a system that sacrifices resilience for comfort." But beyond that, I just think the book is fun. It's compelling, it's action packed, it captures the imagination. When it was released, it was optioned for a film pretty much immediately by Legendary Entertainment, and I'm pretty sure that James Ashcroft was at one point signed on to direct, but there haven't been any updates on that front for a while. I I wasn't too impressed by the adaptation of World War Z, also by Max Brooks. I feel like a lot was lost in the translation to film, and I think that Devolution would probably suffer in much the same way. So, if and when the film does come out, it's not at the top of my list for things to watch. Number 8, Holding the Man by Timothy Congrave. This was published posthumously after Congrave had died from AIDS related complications. It's a memoir about his relationship with his husband from when they were in school together through to, unfortunately, their shared illness and deaths, following about 15 years. The title, Holding the Man, is apparently a term from Aussie Rules, but I don't know enough about football to actually tell you any more than that. Overall, this is a very challenging book to read. It's filled with anger and grief and doesn't really hold back. Uh, not just the circumstances of the AIDS epidemic, but also Conograve's own feelings of accountability and his what he feels is the responsibility that he is carrying with him for exposing his partner to HIV. I would generally recommend the book, but keeping in mind that it's very emotionally challenging. It's not for everyone, but it is a very good snapshot of the gay culture in Australia during that period. There was a film adaptation in 2015, but I don't think it was that well known outside of Australia. But the actor who played Timothy Conograve was in a few episodes of House of the Dragon, if that's moving you. I don't I It's complicated anytime there's a film which is a biopic or an adaptation of a memoir because you always have to balance good storytelling in film versus staying true and sincere to a person's story. And sometimes that balance does not work well. People tend to go more for the story than for the reality. And sometimes that can come across as, almost disrespectful to the memory of the person in question. I don't think Holding the Man has that problem, but it's something that's always in the back of my mind when I'm seeing a film based on a real person, especially a real person from quite recent history. It's a little different if we're talking about something quite historical. Holding the Man was also adapted for the stage in 2006, and it actually made it to London's West End. It wasn't just some weird little Australian thing. Unfortunately, I haven't had the opportunity to actually watch the play, but I've heard that it's really good. Number 7, The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. Now, this really captured my imagination when I read it. Tom Ripley is probably the most empty character in literature up until maybe Patrick Bateman in American Psycho. He's a con artist who becomes obsessed with a man and eventually kills him and takes over his identity. There's 4 sequels to this book. I've read 2 of them and wasn't really interested in reading the others. The first 2 felt more about exploring Ripley's life of crime and watching him get in and out of situations than it was about exploring those themes of identity like the first book did. So I felt like I wasn't really compelled to keep reading them. More famous than the book itself, probably, is the Matt Damon movie that came out in the 90s. Um, One of the big differences between the book and film is that Ripley is pretty much explicitly gay in the movie. Uh, Not that he's straight in the book, I don't think that's what's being implied, but more than that, in the book, Tom Ripley doesn't know what he is. He doesn't understand his own experiences. He doesn't know whether he's gay or bisexual or asexual or what's going on. And neither do the other characters. In fact, probably the line that most defines Ripley as a character is said by one of the other characters. He may not be queer, he's just a nothing, which is worse. The miniseries adaptation in 2024, Ripley, starring Andrew Scott, uh, I haven't seen, but I understand was very well received and highly critically acclaimed. And I understand that in that miniseries, Ripley's sexuality is again more ambiguously portrayed, similar to the book. But having not seen it for myself, I can't be sure. Number 6, Hair One Moment by Leon Moriarty. Now, I don't know how well Leon Moriarty is actually known outside of Australia. I've read and liked a lot of her books. So when Here One Moment came out last year, I read it more or less straight away without knowing anything about it. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that it made me cry and nearly throw up. Um, Now, part of this is down to the fact that one of the characters in it, Ethan, is uncomfortably relatable for me. I've been through something quite similar to some of the things that Ethan goes through in that book. In fact, uncomfortably similar. Um, but I suspect that although I uncomfortably related to Ethan, other people are probably seeing themselves in different characters as well. Some people feel like they're relating to Leo, Eve, Dom, Paula, Allegra. From what I've seen in reviews online, especially Paula, a lot of people really connect with her story. Essentially, the book's about a woman on a plane who prophesizes everyone's age at death and cause of death, and the way that everyone else on the flight reacts to that. A lot of Moriarty's books either have been or are being adapted to either film or TV. Big Little Lies and Apples Never Fall were both TV miniseries that I've seen, and Big Little Lies was very good. Apples Never Fall was all right. Nine Perfect Strangers has been adapted as well. I haven't seen that, but I'm interested in doing so. And I know that The Husband's Secret and The Last Anniversary are also being adapted at the moment. I would love to see Here One Moment get adapted in the same way as Big Little Lies. Number five, I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy. Now, I'm not exactly presenting a hot take here by saying I'm Glad My Mum Died is one of the best books of the last few years. I think everyone knows that by now. For those who don't, it's a memoir about McCurdy's experience as a child actor and being raised by an abusive parent, and her complicated relationship with identifying her parent as abusive. Uh, I read the or I should say I listened to the audiobook, which definitely adds some extra power to the story as McCurdy narrates her own story. Um, it also makes things a lot more emotional and raw feeling. You can hear her voice start to break while speaking in certain parts. And that can make it feel quite confronting for some people. Um, a lot of people found the title "I'm Glad My Mum Died" deliberately controversial, but I feel like McCurdy gives due time to discussing how she has that complex relationship with her mother and complicated feelings about her mother's death. Um, Obviously, this is an exception to discussions about adaptations. I don't think I'm Glad My Mum Died should be or could be adapted to film, but worth bringing up is the documentary series Quiet on Set from 2024. Um, Quiet on Set was about child acting and, in particular, talked a lot about Nickelodeon and some of the problems at Nickelodeon. McCurdy mentioned relatively obliquely some of these things in her memoir, and these things were mentioned in Quiet on Set. They actually mentioned McCurdy's memoir specifically and used some archival footage of interviews with McCurdy, but McCurdy declined to take part in the series. Number four, Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and honorable mention, The Martian by Andy Weir. All right, so it's two, not one, but they're very similar, so I'm gonna go with it. As a rule, I'm not a sci fi person. I don't think of myself as a sci fi person. There's been a few science fiction books that I've read and really enjoyed, but few and far between. But Project Hail Mary and The Martian, definitely on that list. Project Hail Mary is another book that really excels in audio format, to the point where I've heard some people say that they don't understand how it could be consumed and really appreciated the same way just in prose. Uh, both Project Hail Mary and The Martian are really similar in structure. They both follow a single male character who is alone for the majority of the story. Although alone with an asterisk in Project Hail Mary, I do respect Rocky as an individual, but there's still large swaths of time where the main character is by himself. There are also large passages where we see groups of other people together. In Project Hail Mary, these mostly take the form of flashbacks back to when Ryland was on Earth, whereas in The Martian, it's meanwhile on Earth. But in both cases, I like the solo parts better. I like the survival stories of these individuals better. Um, and for those who have read Project Hail Mary, you'll know what I mean by this. Yes, I walk around my house going, amaze, amaze, sometimes. It's really fun. I recommend it. My kind of lukewarm criticism of these books is that I can definitely see how Andy Weir's style could be kind of obnoxious in large doses. And the similarity in structure and content between Project Hail Mary and The Martian means that if you tried to read them back to back, I don't think you would appreciate either of them as much as I did reading them separately. The Martian had a pretty good film adaptation, all things considered. I didn't find it too remarkable one way or another, except for the fact that I feel like that little cap at the end wasn't really necessary, in my opinion. But Project Hail Mary is in post production at the time I'm recording this, and it's got Ryan Gosling as Ryland Grace. Now, I know how funny Ryan Gosling can be. We definitely saw that recently in the Barbie movie, but I really recommend The Nice Guys as well if you want to see his comedy chops. But my big question about this is Ryan Gosling too sexy to be Ryland Grace? Or Okay, sexy might not be the right word. Um, Ryland can be sexy, but Ryan Gosling is very conventionally handsome, and that's just not how I picture Ryland at all. Number three, We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver. Now, when I first finished reading We Need to Talk About Kevin, I gave it 4 stars on my book review website of choice, Storygraph. And then I came back 2 weeks later to upgrade it to 5 stars because I couldn't stop thinking about it. Something about We Need to Talk About Kevin changed my brain chemistry. And that's definitely unique among books I've read in the last few years. The book is about a school massacre and really goes deep on nature versus nurture and the frankly controversial subject of parents who don't like their children from the beginning. I've never heard two people have quite the same take on We Need to Talk About Kevin, myself included. I've never heard anyone have quite the same interpretation I do. Now, one of the important things about We Need to Talk About Kevin, especially when we start talking about it in adaptation, is that it's an epistolary novel told exclusively from Kevin's mother's, Eva's, perspective. And not just from her perspective, but all in hindsight. Even the stories about Kevin when he was a child are written with the knowledge of the events of Tuesday. And I feel like that really informs how you interpret the story as a reader. This is not just Eva and her evolving perspective on her son as time goes by, but Eva's experiences with her son colored by what she knows now. And the film adaptation by Lynn Ramsey, besides some controversial casting choices, um, because it loses that epistolary and that hindsight format, it by nature implies a more objective viewpoint, which means that we lose some of that context, which adds that extra dimension to the story. I still think the film is quite good, but it does mean that the film is doing something a little bit different with its themes than the book is. The other thing that makes me wonder about We Need to Talk About Kevin is that I wonder if it hit different in 2003 when it was first written than it does today. As far as I know from the statistics, there was a really significant spike in documented school shootings since 2013 and an even bigger spike since 2018. Um, Not that they didn't happen prior to 2003, but the numbers seem to have increased. And I mean, I don't know if that's due to an increase in how we document and record these events, but I do wonder if school massacres and school shootings are more in the public consciousness now, and therefore people in general have a little bit of a different read on them than they would have when the book was first written. Number two, Vile Bodies and Brideshead Revisited by Evil and War. Yes, it's another two for, alright, so my top 10 is more like a top 12. Whatever. Brideshead Revisited is a very famous and highly acclaimed novel, and the miniseries adaptation with Jeremy Irons is considered by some people to be one of the best British television series ever made. Uh, Brideshead Revisited always gets brought up as a prime example of a classic book from that era, and in particular, anyone who's looking for classic novels that touch on homoerotic stories, Brideshead Revisited always comes up. And I think Brideshead Revisited really stands up to the hype. The relationship between Charles and Sebastian and the way that it evolves and then breaks down, it's touching and then it's heartbreaking. The mini-series with Jeremy Irons is in one way remarkable because it's so highly acclaimed, but also because it's quite long. It has 11 episodes with a total runtime of 659 minutes. And Brideshead Revisited isn't a particularly long book, so I had no idea going in how they were going to make 660 minutes worth of content out of it. But the miniseries at no point feels like it's overstaying its welcome, which is really interesting to me. It was also adapted to film in 2008, and the film was pretty bad by comparison. Besides the fact that apparently there's over 600 minutes of content in Brideshead Revisited if you want to, the 2008 movie chooses to interpret Charles and Sebastian's relationship as one sided. Sebastian has either romantic or sexual or both feelings for Charles that he tries to express that Charles does not return. Um, in the book, although it's not explicit by modern standards by any means, I think it's best summed up by this quote from Christopher Hitchens, who criticized the ridiculous word platonic that for some peculiar reason still crops up in discussion of the story. In the novel, whatever the quasi or outright romantic relationship is between them, Charles outgrows Sebastian, but it was definitely mutual while it lasted. So I think it's a strange choice for the film to take that different angle. Vile Bodies, by comparison, is not nearly as well regarded or well remembered as Brideshead Revisited, and that's fair. It shouldn't be. But it does deserve more than it gets. It's more of a social satire compared to Brideshead, which is much more sincere. It's really funny, really engaging, and takes some very dark turns as the story goes on, talking about a group of socialites who are adventuring and having fun and partying as the world sort of falls apart around them in the interwar period between World War One and World War Two. Although it was published in 1930, so Evelyn Waugh did not know that it was the mid-war period. He didn't know World War Two was coming, but watch out for the end. That turned out to be quite prescient in some ways. I suppose he saw the writing on the wall. But this was also adapted to film by Stephen Fry in 2003. The film is called Bright Young Things, and it's a really good movie. Some things about the ending are a little different in the movie. Some things are a little more explicit, where in the book they were just implied, and some things are a little more vague in the movie, where in the book they were quite explicit. It juggles things a little. Consider the ways that Miles's story is ending versus Agatha's, but the other interesting thing about both Vile Bodies and Brideshead Revisited to me is that they both contain some autobiographical elements that I think really benefit from knowing a little bit about Evelyn Waugh's life and the way that he thought about his life and his college experiences and his youth in between 1930 and 1945. And number one, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Now, I didn't know that I wanted this book until I read it. It opens as what looks like this whirlwind romance between a wealthy widower and the naive girl getting to experience a life above what she had before. And it takes a turn into this deep seated unease and isolation and feeling of being out of place. The main character doesn't have a name. She's only ever referred to as the new Mrs. De Winter. And I've seen some people say that they feel that this is a sign of laziness on du Maurier's part, that she didn't bother naming the main character, which I definitely disagree with. And I've seen other people give the take that they didn't, in fact, even realize that the main character didn't have a name until they'd read it multiple times, which I think is really interesting. I think the fact that she is nameless adds an extra dimension to the themes and really plays into those. She's been so subsumed into this life where she is so out of place, she doesn't have her own identity anymore. As the story unfolds and we learn more about Rebecca from different characters' perspectives, and especially at the end, we're sort of invited to consider, how does this change how we feel about different characters in the story, and how much can we trust each character's different take on what they're telling us about Rebecca? The book was adapted into film by Alfred Hitchcock in 1940, and it's quite well known, I think, for adding a sort of implied lesbian element to the relationship between Mrs. Danvers and the late Rebecca. Um, but what's interesting also is that the ending is a bit different, and as far as I'm aware, that's because the Hays Code required that the ending in the book would not have been allowed in the film, so they adjusted it a little bit to make it fly. It was also adapted into a Netflix film in 2020, and frankly, the Netflix film was nothing. Uh, it left very little impression on me. Constance Grady from Vox gave the quote about it, that it's a horror film that is resolutely sure there is nothing horrifying going on here at all, actually. And what a disappointing adaptation for such a good book. Well, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, please like, subscribe, comment, or what have you. Do you agree with my takes? Do you disagree? Do you think I'm crazy? Do you like these books? Do you want to know more? By all means, let me know.